Welcome to Stairway to English. In this video, you will listen and read about the history of toilet, from ancient times to the modern world. This lesson will help you improve your English while learning a surprising and important part of human history. If you enjoy this video, please like it and share your thoughts in the comments. Episode 1. The first toilets in ancient civilizations. When we think about human history, we often focus on big events, such as wars, inventions, or the rise and fall of empires. But there is another story that is just as important for daily life: the history of the toilet. This story may sound simple, but it is deeply connected to human health, culture, and even technology. Without toilets, cities could not grow safely. Diseases would spread more easily, and life would be much less comfortable. The toilet is not only a tool for cleanliness, but also a sign of how societies developed over thousands of years. The first toilets appeared many thousands of years ago in ancient civilizations. Archaeologists discovered that people in the Indus Valley, which is in present-day India and Pakistan, built some of the earliest toilets around 2500 BCE. These toilets were very simple, but they showed an advanced understanding of hygiene. They were connected to a drainage system that carried waste away from houses. This system was one of the earliest examples of urban planning, and it showed how much the Indus people cared about keeping their cities clean. Around the same time, other civilizations also created ways to deal with waste. In ancient Mesopotamia, people used clay pipes and built small sewage systems. They did not have toilets like we do today, but they made efforts to separate human waste from living areas. This shows that even the earliest cities understood the importance of sanitation for public health. In ancient Egypt, toilets were found in the homes of wealthy people. These toilets were usually made of limestone or wood with a hole that led to a container filled with sand. Servants would empty the container when it was full. Although this system was not as advanced as the Indus Valley drainage, it still made life more comfortable for the upper classes. Poorer Egyptians did not have toilets at home, and they usually relieved themselves in fields or simple pits outside the city. In ancient Crete, the Minoan civilization developed toilets that were very advanced for their time. Around 2000 BCE, the Minoans built toilets with flushing systems that used water. Archaeologists found remains of stone toilets connected to clay pipes that carried waste away. These discoveries surprised many historians because they showed that even in the Bronze Age, people were experimenting with water technology to improve hygiene. The famous city of Knossos in Crete had one of these early flushing toilets. Water would be poured into the toilet to wash away the waste. This system was very similar to the idea of the modern toilet, even though it was built thousands of years earlier. The Minoans understood that water could be used not only for drinking and cleaning, but also for sanitation. In ancient China, toilets were also part of daily life. Evidence shows that around 2,000 years ago, people used basic toilets with wooden seats and clay containers. Sometimes these containers were even used to collect human waste for farming, because waste could be turned into fertilizer for crops. This shows how different cultures found creative ways to use and manage something that all humans must deal with. All of these examples prove that toilets are not a modern invention. From the Indus Valley to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to Crete, and from China to many other parts of the world, people were always looking for ways to handle waste in a safe and practical way. The methods were different, but the purpose was the same: to protect health, to keep living areas clean, and to make daily life more comfortable. The toilets were not perfect. They were often limited to the rich, and poor people usually did not have access to them. Still, these early inventions marked the beginning of an important journey. They showed that sanitation was more than just a personal issue. It was a social need that affected everyone in the community. A city could not survive without some form of waste management, and toilets were at the heart of that system. The story of the first toilets tells us something important about humanity. From the very beginning, people were not only interested in surviving, but also in improving the quality of life. They wanted to build cities where people could live together in health and comfort. The toilet, simple as it may seem, was one of the tools that made civilization possible. Episode 2: Roman Baths and Public Toilets. When we think about the ancient Romans, we usually imagine powerful armies, grand buildings, and busy marketplaces. But another part of Roman life was their unique approach to toilets and sanitation. The Romans are famous not only for their roads and aqueducts, but also for their impressive systems of baths and public toilets. These creations were not just practical, but also social. Because, for Romans, going to the toilet was not always a private activity. In Roman cities, public toilets were common. These toilets were often built near the great baths or in central areas of the city where many people gathered. They were long rooms with stone or marble benches. The benches had holes cut into them, and under the benches, water channels carried waste away. Sometimes these channels were connected to the famous Roman aqueducts, which brought fresh water into the city. This way, waste could be washed away with flowing water, keeping the toilets cleaner than in many earlier societies. Unlike today, Roman toilets were not private at all. People would sit next to each other, often with no walls or dividers. For Romans, this was normal. They were used to living life publicly, whether in the forum, the baths, or even in the toilets. Some historians believe that people used these spaces to talk, share news, and even discuss politics. It may seem strange to us now, but for Romans, the toilet could be a place of conversation. Another interesting detail is how Romans cleaned themselves. Instead of toilet paper, which was not invented yet, they used a sponge attached to a stick. This tool, called a tersorium, was kept in a bucket of water or vinegar. After using it, people would return the sponge to the bucket for the next person to use. By today's standards, this seems very unhygienic, but at the time it was considered normal. It also shows that sanitation, while important, was very different from the way we understand it today. The Romans also built public baths, and these were deeply connected to their toilets. The baths were not only for washing, but also for social life, relaxation, and even business. People would spend hours there moving between hot rooms, cold pools, and exercise areas. Toilets were often located near the baths because both required flowing water. This close connection between hygiene and social life shows how advanced Roman culture was compared to many other civilizations of the same period. Roman engineers were masters at building aqueducts and sewage systems. One of the most famous sewage systems was the Cloaca Maxima in Rome, which means the Great Drain. It was first built around 600 BCE and later expanded as the city grew. The Cloaca Maxima carried waste and rainwater out of the city and into the Tiber River. Without this system, the city of Rome could not have supported so many people. Some parts of this system are still in use today, more than 2,000 years later. However, not everything about Roman toilets was healthy. Because toilets were public and shared, they could also spread disease. Historians have found evidence that parasites and infections were common in ancient Rome, despite the flowing water. The sponge sticks were a clear source of germs. Still, Compared to many other ancient societies, Rome's toilets and sewage systems were very advanced and showed a strong effort to deal with waste in an organized way. Private toilets also existed, especially in the houses of rich Romans. These toilets were usually small rooms connected to the kitchen or near the courtyard. Waste from these toilets often went into pits or smaller sewage channels. However, most people in the city used the public toilets because they were easier to access and connected to the main water systems. The story of Roman toilets tells us that hygiene is not only about health, but also about culture. For the Romans, toilets were part of public life, and this shaped the way they built their cities. The aqueducts, the baths, and the toilets were all connected in one great system that made Roman life more organized and comfortable. Even if their cleaning methods may shock us today, their engineering skills continue to impress the modern world. By looking at Roman toilets, we can see how far human societies had come since the first toilets of the Indus Valley or ancient Egypt. The Romans took sanitation seriously and built systems that influenced many later civilizations. They showed that even something as basic as a toilet could be designed with creativity, engineering, and social life in mind. Episode 3: Toilets in the Middle Ages. After the fall of the Roman Empire, many parts of Europe lost the advanced systems of aqueducts, sewage, and public baths. The Middle Ages brought a very different approach to toilets. In this period, sanitation was not as advanced, and waste management was often simple and sometimes very unpleasant. Still, people found creative solutions, and toilets continued to develop in ways that reflected the culture, architecture, and daily life of the time. In castles and large buildings, one of the most common types of toilet was called the garderobe. A garderobe was usually a small room built into the walls of a castle, often high above the ground. The toilet was a simple hole in a wooden seat, and the waste would drop directly down a shaft into the moat, a pit, or just onto the ground outside. Some castles even had several garderobes, especially near the sleeping quarters of nobles. However, these toilets did not always smell very pleasant, and keeping them clean was a constant challenge. The word garderobe also has an interesting meaning. In French, it means wardrobe or closet. Some historians believe that people sometimes stored clothes in these rooms because the smell of waste was thought to keep away insects and moths. This shows how different medieval ideas about hygiene were from ours today. In towns and villages, ordinary people had simpler solutions. Many houses had pits dug in the ground called cesspits. These were used as toilets, and when they became full, workers called gong farmers or night soil men were hired to clean them out. This was very hard, dirty, and dangerous work, but it was necessary to keep towns livable. The waste collected from cesspits was sometimes taken outside the city walls and used as fertilizer on fields. In cities like London, Paris, or other medieval centers, public cleanliness was often a problem. People sometimes emptied chamber pots, which were portable toilets kept in bedrooms, directly into the street. They would shout a warning in the local language before throwing the waste out of the window, but the streets often became dirty and smelly. This poor sanitation contributed to the spread of diseases, such as the plague, which devastated Europe in the 14th century. Despite these problems, there were some interesting developments. Monasteries, where monks lived, often had more organized toilet systems. These toilets, sometimes called retterdorters, were long rows of seats built above running water, similar to Roman designs. The monks needed quiet and order in their daily lives, and this included systems for hygiene. In many ways, monasteries preserved some of the knowledge of sanitation that had been lost after Rome. Another important feature of medieval toilets was their connection to architecture. In castles, garderobes were often built so that waste would fall far away from living spaces. They were sometimes located in towers or over rivers to help wash away the waste. This showed that even without Roman-style aqueducts, people still tried to separate waste from living areas, at least in wealthier households. However, for most ordinary people, hygiene was very poor compared to earlier Roman times. Streets were dirty, water was not always clean, and toilets were basic. The lack of proper waste systems had a serious effect on health. Diseases spread easily, and life expectancy was often short. Historians today see the Middle Ages as a time when sanitation declined in Europe, even though some other parts of the world, such as the Islamic world and parts of Asia, had more advanced systems at the same time. In the Middle East, for example, Islamic cities often had public baths, running water, and better toilet systems. In China, simple but effective toilets were used in both cities and farms, and human waste was carefully collected for use as fertilizer. This shows that progress in sanitation did not stop everywhere, but in medieval Europe, toilets became simpler and less advanced than those of the Romans. Still, the medieval period was important because it laid the foundation for later changes. The problems of dirty streets and poor hygiene pushed people to think about new solutions in later centuries. By the end of the medieval period, especially in growing cities, there was more awareness of the need for better sanitation. This awareness eventually led to the great changes in toilet design during the Renaissance and the early modern period. The history of toilets in the Middle Ages reminds us that technology and knowledge can be lost when societies collapse. The Roman systems were far ahead of their time, but in medieval Europe, many of those ideas were forgotten. Yet people continued to adapt, finding their own ways to deal with waste, even if those ways seem very primitive to us now. Episode 4: Toilets in the Renaissance and Early Modern Times. As Europe moved out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, many aspects of life began to change. People became more curious about science, health, and comfort. Cities grew larger, trade increased, and architecture became more advanced. With these changes, toilets also slowly started to improve, even if progress was uneven and often slow. In the Renaissance, some wealthy families began to think more about cleanliness. Palaces and big houses sometimes had more private rooms for toilets. These toilets were still very simple compared to modern ones, but they showed that people were starting to care more about hygiene and comfort. Garderobes and cesspits were still common, but new ideas about water and sanitation were spreading. One important change was the growing interest in using running water for waste. Engineers and builders studied Roman aqueducts and water systems, and they tried to design ways to bring fresh water into cities again. In some places, this meant fountains, wells, and pipes that made water more available. Although full sewage systems like those of the Romans were not rebuilt immediately, the idea of connecting toilets to water started to take shape. During the early modern period, one of the most famous inventions appeared: the flush toilet. In 1596, Sir John Harrington, an English courtier and godson of Queen Elizabeth I, designed a toilet with a system that used water to flush away waste. His invention included a cistern, a seat, and a handle to release water. It was very advanced for its time, and Queen Elizabeth even had one built in her palace. However, the design did not spread widely at first because it was expensive and water supply was still limited. For ordinary people, chamber pots and cesspits were still the main solutions. A chamber pot was a simple container kept in the bedroom, often under the bed. In the morning, the waste was emptied into the street or a cesspit. This practice continued for many centuries, and in cities like London and Paris, it created big sanitation problems. The streets could be very dirty and the smell was strong. Yet, this was normal daily life for most people. Despite these problems, the Renaissance brought new attitudes. Doctors and scientists began to study how disease spread, and they suspected that dirty conditions and bad smells might be linked to sickness. Although they did not fully understand germs yet, these ideas made people more interested in improving hygiene. This new curiosity about health would later play a key role in developing modern toilets and sewage systems. In castles and country houses, architects also experimented with better toilet designs. Waste chutes were built to carry waste away from living areas, sometimes leading directly into rivers or ditches. Some houses even had multiple toilets connected to the same system. This was not common for everyone, but it showed progress. At the same time, other parts of the world were also developing their own systems. In Japan, for example, toilets were often built over streams so that water could carry away waste. In China, human waste continued to be collected for use in farming, which kept the environment cleaner. These examples show that the idea of improving sanitation was not only a European development, but something that societies around the world were working on in different ways. The Renaissance and early modern times were a turning point because they combined old knowledge with new technologies. People looked back at Roman achievements and tried to learn from them, while also creating new technologies like Harrington's flush toilet. Even though most people still lived with simple and often dirty systems, the seeds of modern sanitation had been planted. By the end of this period, the stage was set for the great changes of the 18th and 19th centuries. As cities became even larger and more crowded, the need for proper toilets and sewage systems became urgent. This would lead to the modern flush toilets and public health systems that we know today. The Renaissance was a time of art, science, and discovery, but it was also a time when people slowly began to realize the importance of toilets and sanitation for health and comfort. Without these changes, the modern world of clean bathrooms and sewage networks would not have been possible. Episode 5: The Modern Toilet and Public Health Revolution. The 18th and 19th centuries brought a revolution in how people thought about toilets, cleanliness, and public health. Cities across Europe and America were growing rapidly due to the Industrial Revolution. Millions of people moved from the countryside into crowded towns to work in factories. This sudden growth created huge sanitation problems. Streets were dirty, rivers became polluted, and diseases such as cholera and typhoid spread quickly. It became clear that better toilets and proper sewage systems were not just a matter of comfort, but of survival. One of the biggest advances of this time was the development of the modern flush toilet. In the 18th century, inventors began to improve on Sir John Harington's earlier design. In 1775, Alexander Cumming patented a version of the flush toilet that included an important feature, the S-shaped pipe, now known as the S-trap. This curved pipe held a small amount of water, which blocked bad smells from coming back up into the house. It was a simple but brilliant idea that made flush toilets much more practical. Later, in the 19th century, Thomas Crapper, a plumber and businessman, popularized the use of flush toilets in England. He improved the designs, installed them widely, and made them a normal part of modern life. Although he did not actually invent the flush toilet, his name became closely linked with it. Today, his story is often told as part of the history of toilets. At the same time, governments and city planners started to build large sewage systems. One famous example was in London. In the mid-1800s, the River Thames was full of waste, and the smell was so terrible that it became known as the Great Stink of 1858. Politicians finally realized that something had to be done. An engineer named Joseph Bazalgette designed an underground sewage system for London, which carried waste safely away from the city. This project greatly improved public health and became a model for other cities around the world. The connection between dirty water and disease was also discovered in this period. In 1854, a doctor named John Snow studied a cholera outbreak in London. He showed that the disease spread through contaminated water, not just through bad air or smell. His discovery was one of the foundations of modern medicine and public health, and it proved the importance of clean water and proper toilets. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the modern bathroom began to take shape. Houses in cities were built with indoor plumbing, meaning people no longer had to use chamber pots or outdoor toilets. Clean water was brought in through pipes, and waste was carried away through underground sewage systems. This change completely transformed daily life. Using a toilet became safe, private, and much more comfortable. In the 20th century, toilets continued to improve. Materials like porcelain were used to make them durable and easy to clean. The designs became more efficient, using less water with each flush. Different countries also developed their own styles. In Japan, for example, high-tech toilets with features like heated seats, water sprays, and even music became popular. These modern designs show that even something as basic as a toilet can continue to evolve with technology. The story of toilets is also the story of human health and dignity. Without proper toilets, disease can spread quickly and life becomes more difficult. Today, the United Nations even recognizes access to clean water and sanitation as a basic human right. But it's important to remember that not everyone in the world has access to safe toilets yet. Billions of people still live without proper sanitation, and solving this problem is one of the big challenges of our time. Looking back, the history of toilets shows how far humanity has come. From simple holes in the ground to Roman aqueducts, from medieval cesspits to Renaissance inventions, and finally to modern flush toilets and sewage systems, every step has been part of the journey toward a healthier and more comfortable life. The toilet may seem like a small detail of everyday life, but it is actually one of the greatest inventions in history. It has saved millions of lives, improved cities, and given people dignity. The next time you use a modern bathroom, you can think about this long journey and appreciate how something so simple is connected to thousands of years of human progress.